which is amazing. I want to tell you a little bit about myself and the show, introduce you to the room, and then we'll get this conversation going. So, I'm Sara McCord. It's nice to meet you. I am a communications and marketing strategist, and my favorite thing about social audio is the access to people who have done the things. That's really my favorite thing that I've seen over the past year. So often we talk about getting into the room. And there's an opportunity for anyone who clicks the link to have access to these conversations, to ask a question, and for us to demystify kind of really complicated ideas that people are saying. I hear people talking about Web3. I hear people talking about climate change. I hear people talking about what's going on in tech and VC and what does all of that mean. And I love the fact that we can just have a conversation about it and literally invite them into the conversation. So that's what I like to do in my shows. Great. Have a conversation. So I did printed out your LinkedIn bio. I have been internet stalking you, but it's not creepy to internet stalk them for a couple of days. So I was just going to quickly kind of introduce you to the room for anyone who might not know. You are a serial entrepreneur and early stage investor, recently co-founded Climactic, and to invest in climate tech startups with a focus on tech that decarbonizes the enterprise. You also co-founded Freestyle, an early stage general tech VC, where you're now a board partner. You co-founded and were the president of Spinner, the first multi-channel internet radio service acquired by AOL for $320 million in 1999. And then as well as CEO and co-founder of Crackle, acquired by Sony in 2006. And since that was not enough, you're also now helping the state of California with the COVID-19 crisis and the fallout from that. So, I really wasn't sure where to start this conversation. It's super interesting to me when everyone's like, the internet is changing, to talk to people who've been there when the internet changed before. And then I saw this tweet from you yesterday, and you said this war of words. I'm sorry?
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, we're starting with Twitter. It's a good sign. It's a good sign. Right. You said this odd war of words between Web3 and climate is a waste of energy and NFTs. I want to start there because I feel like that's a tweet that encompasses all of these topics that business owners maybe feel like they should understand, thought leaders feel like they should understand, but maybe they don't. And I can tell it's a whole bunch of subjects that you're passionate about wrapped into one tweet. So let's jump in with both feet and start there. What did you mean by that?
I am a student of both, right? So I'm still in the process of learning about both. And I would say I'm a little more ahead on my understanding of what's happening in the planet than I am on Web3. But I think what I saw is that there were just these two opportunities are foundational, right? They're probably the most potentially impactful of any opportunity that I'm seeing, like any foundational change. And I think what I didn't like is that I saw that the two groups were fighting. Like they were arguing about which group is more important, and the Web3 folks would put down climate folks, and it just was going back and forth, and it became old. And I'm like, these are both foundational opportunities for very different reasons. And so I just got tired of the fighting, and I tried to make fun of it using maybe they're too dad jokey, but I tried to do the best I could to call attention to it, but also not in another incendiary way.
So talk to me about, from your vantage point, both of these foundational opportunities is what I want to do, and then kind of talk about kind of the potential synergies there. So first, as I said, I'm really curious. So when it starts that you started the first multi-channel internet radio service in 1999, I'm curious, everyone right now is like, audio, it's so new, it's so innovative. I'm really curious, first, what does it feel like for you, selling this company at the very beginning almost of Web 2 to now be looking ahead to Web 3. So I want to start there with what are the foundational opportunities that you see, and kind of what can you explain to people who are break this down for me?
So I would say I'm in third grade when it comes to Web 3, and I'm probably in high school when it comes to climate. So I have a third grader's understanding. But what I see that I like is really the effort to to decentralize finance, right? I think that's exciting to me. Decentralize everything, and also, I can't. There's a community aspect to Web3 that I have not seen anything else prior to date. Real community, and I think that is exciting, especially when I've seen, as it relates to climate, I've seen interesting opportunities that kind of take the best of what a DAO is and the best of what NFTs are and the best of what tokens can do to create ecosystems within climate. And if you ask me to describe all those things in detail, I will totally fail.
I promise I won't. That's not on my on my cards.
But what it's just last thing on this, we're rethinking how media works, right? We're rethinking how, and if you think about it, we're rethinking how media works, how finance works. That's foundational. That alone is foundational. And so where does it go? I have a clearer path to where climate tech goes. I think, obviously we need to go beyond kind of some of the speculative kind of NFT world that we're in now. But I see potential, even thinking about, well, can we use, I think of NFTs in some way as what, kind of a graphical user interface was to the internet, right? It takes, ones and zeros and turns them into something that we can all understand, like an image of something that has rights. And so that to me is what gets me excited about NFTs, especially as it relates to, imagine if you want to buy carbon offsets by supporting an acre of forest. I imagine that captures an NFT, and there are companies that are doing this. So much more powerful to actually have something that you can have in your portfolio, like your persona, that shows that you're represented. Your work is now represented as a beautiful visual that you can share with the world.
Yeah, and that's actually where I want to go and what I'm really interested in, because, for example, one of my dear friends is an aligned marketing strategist. And like one of her kind of messages to the world is that, right, in order to be a good marketer, you don't have to be greedy, you don't have to be predatory, you don't have to take advantage of people. And similarly, what I think is really interesting and why I kind of wanted to start with this, understanding of Web3 from someone like yourself who's an early adopter and moved to everything that you're doing in climate and started with this tweet, is this idea that they don't have to be at odds. It's not that in order to succeed in Web3, screw the environment, right? For lack of a better term. Right. So I really want to dial into kind of what inspired you to uplift climate tech startups and also how you're doing it. Because I'll be candid with you, when I see a sentence like invest in climate tech startups with a focus on tech that decarbonizes the enterprise, I feel like if I didn't already know what that meant, I wouldn't know what that means. So I really want to break it down for everyone listening. Yeah. What does that mean for people who feel like, explain this to me. How can I better understand this?
So we didn't start out in this place. Like 18 months ago, my partner and I started really looking at where we could add value, like what our additionality might be to this problem. And we looked at, both Raj Kapoor and I, as my partner, we both have worked in the consumer. We both started consumer companies. Like I started a company in the music space and the video space, and he started a company in the photography space and the fitness space. And we quickly realized that, as much as it may not be exciting to talk about, consumers are not willing to sacrifice for green at scale, right? There's a vocal minority that will make a difference by convincing, politicians and governments and corporations to change, but there's still a minority. Most people will not sacrifice. I think if you take an example, like look at the organic farming industry, 6% of farmland is organic. So it makes a big difference to all of us in the bubble, but vast majority of Americans are not consuming organic. With climate, consumers will not sacrifice at scale. So we had to look to, well, can the government make a difference? Well, we've all seen how the government changes sides every couple of years, and climate is very politicized. And so we really can't count on the government to save the planet. There are regulation can make a difference, but we can't count on it. So we're left with, like, what's left? There's only one pillar left, and that's the enterprise, like companies, what corporations, how they do business. And then we started looking at, well, corporations are being influenced by their biggest investors. they're influenced by the vocal minority, they're influenced by government, and they're influenced by their own employees, right?
Yeah.
So those four ingredients led us to really what our focus is today, which is investing in the technologies that help the enterprise remove carbon in their supply chain, right? I think we all know what supply chain means now. It's interesting. It's like you can't, even USA Today is covering like our supply chain has been impacted by COVID and by China. And so I think that is our focus to really, in like different words, we want to give companies technology to reduce their footprint in the world,
Yeah.
right? To do better. That's our focus.
Can you share an example with me?
Yes. I mean, there's some boring examples, some exciting examples. I'll share
I
an
want an exciting one.
Yeah.
It's nighttime over here on the East Coast. We gotta keep it exciting.
We're gonna wake them up. Okay. So there is a woman who worked at Lyft. Raj, my partner, was the chief strategy officer at Lyft. She left Lyft to start this company. Nobody knew that in her past she was a material scientist. She'd gone to school. At school, she studied material science, and she'd been working on this idea that we could actually create carbon negative material for clothing. So it sounds crazy. How can you do that? And so she pitched us, and she and her identical twin sister, they're in their mid-20s, they pitched us this idea they could take carbon dioxide from a factory. Let's just for argument's sake, let's call it an apparel factory. And they could take carbon dioxide from the smokestack, capture it there, and then on site using enzymes, convert that CO2 into glucose, a sugar, and then convert that sugar into polyester.
Wow.
Right? Polyester is used in about a third of all clothing. So it sounded fantastical, like how are they going to do that, all these different pieces. And so we actually were able to pull in some material scientists smarter than we are, really at Carnegie Mellon. And they were like, no, this all makes sense. They need to scale the process of converting the CO2 into this sugar. But once they do that, the rest is straightforward. So if they're successful, which they have been at small scale, we'll be wearing carbon negative clothing, which is pretty badass.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. So I'm curious, as I said again, I love kind of debunking stereotypes. And I think that there's almost this like stereotype of this like do-gooder tree hugger and they're not successful. And another thing that's really interesting to me is that, you're extremely successful in the tech space, but you're also pushing forward these really socially driven causes. So you're pushing forward climate. I read an article that, you're passionate about helping female founded companies. Obviously you're trying to help the state of California post-pandemic. And I'm curious for you, like, was this something did you have like a heart for public service throughout and you were just waiting? Did it evolve over the course of your career? What does it look like for someone who's interested in some of these purpose-driven causes and also, building monetary success?
So I spoke to 20 students from my alma mater, from Duke, like recently. And I basically asked them around the table, I said, who wants to work in sustainability? And like maybe a quarter of the hands went up. And I said, guess what? You're all going to be working in sustainability, whether you know it or not. It's just a matter of time because it's going to impact everything. And you should actually have FOMO because this is the single biggest opportunity of your lifetime. And I gave them the example of kind of the formation of the internet. I was lucky to have been part of that, in the late 90s. I was a founder then. That's where I founded Spinner. And back then when the internet was created, like we started to see the potential for it. And then like all these digital divisions started springing up at corporations. And then in 99, Google raised their Series A round at I think it was 199 million valuation. And everyone went crazy, saying that'll never work. Like that'll never work. It's too much. They're never going to earn that valuation down the road. It's too much. And of course now we know what Google's worth. So what I see a lot of parallels in the climate tech world today. There's sustainability groups at companies. There are high valuations. And it is foundational to everything. All of us who work in business, it is foundational. Now, so I really want everyone to have FOMO and be interested in exploring what does he mean by that FOMO? It's just like these are just causes. How can that change how we do business? You'll see, like, don't take my word for it. You're going to see there's a reason why I think we're up to like 3,000 companies in 2021 shared their sustainability goals publicly, and they're going to cover everything they do as a company. So you're going to hear about this more and more. It's the sustainability groups will be part of what every division does at a company. It really is going to change how we all operate. But I never set out to work in public service. I actually didn't. I started a nonprofit in the climate space called #Climate, and I partnered
By
with
the way, I love that actually when you say #climate, that it actually hashtag is part of the title, just as someone in comms. I love that. I think that's hysterical. Continue.
Well, it was funny. It was available back then. And so my partners were the NBA and Guns N' Roses, which is kind of really funny. Why would I partner with them? They just both were interested in climate back then. And it was really a way for nonprofits to connect with their activists and with one click share actions on Twitter and Facebook, right? It wasn't going to get it done. It was helpful for a while. And if you then shift to COVID, when I pitched our governor on starting a task force to source private company solutions to many of the challenges that our government was facing. And I did it with a friend and fellow venture capitalist, Bill Trenchard, who works at First Round. And what we found was that at the end of 5 months of doing this, that we had a bunch of successes around food security and some track and trace software and other things and a bunch of challenges. But what it told me was that nonprofits and the government alone cannot solve a challenge this big. It has to be the private sector. It has to be. Like these without the private sector, we would be in a very different situation with COVID. Think of vaccines, protective equipment. I mean, all of this. So that led me to really believe like a religion that we have to change how companies do business to solve climate change.
So I have 2 follow-up questions for you there. The first is that, when you keep saying like, I just see this, because I always think about the business owners in the room who, have less experience. My first question for you is like, how do you just see it? You know what I mean? If they're like, how does he know? He's like, just trust me, I see it. I'm curious what that early adopter mentality feels like. Like, is that something, where does that come from? Is my first question. And then my second question for you is when you're like, every business is going to do this. Again, I'm curious, if I'm a small business owner, how can I start making different decisions, maybe in my business practice? What are things that are applicable to me or things that I can explore?
So I'll answer that in a disappointing way and hopefully a helpful way. So the work that I did, it's not just, in the beginning, I suspected what needed to happen, but I did the hard work of interviewing like sustainability execs across America, everywhere from Black & Decker to Walmart to Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger. And I just got to know what they care about.
Do those interviews exist somewhere? I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. Is there a catalog of those interviews somewhere?
Where? What?
Is there like a catalog of those interviews somewhere?
No.
We need to create that as an aside. Like if that's the proof, if you did an interview series with every major founder about like how climate's impacting their business, we're gonna create that content. Continue.
It's a great idea. And it may actually be happening, right? So I'm
too late. See, I needed the early adopter advice earlier. Okay.
And I didn't do this formally. Obviously, it was in more of I had Q&A prepared, but it was more informal, like on a Zoom call. But I learned that organizations had actually woken up, and they'd woken up, not some of them because they're ethical, others were just like, oh shit, I'm being pressured by all these different constituents, and I need to do something different, or else I'm not going to be running my business for much longer. So there was this moment for most companies where they saw that they had to change. And it's not necessarily that they wanted to change because they're moral, right? It's that they are being pressured from all these different sources. And so I saw all of that, and I'm like, and then I asked, like I've talked to Cargill, for example, and I said, how, you have these public goals that you've stated. How are you going to get there? Like, you don't have the technology. And then the gentleman there who basically manages their investing said, well, that's where you come in. Like, we have to unearth the startups that are going to change the way we do business. We know we don't have the technology. We want to fund it and then use it. And so that moment for me was like, oh, so maybe if I actually built a practice, like an investment practice focused on unearthing the technologies that these companies all want to use to change their stripes, that could be powerful.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of so I did a bunch of work. I wish it was just my crystal ball, which is pretty murky, but it really was doing the work and talking to people and ending up in this space.
Even that advice is super valuable though, because I think people say, how does he know this? How does he know this is the future of business? And I think having the meetings, talking to the people in business, sometimes we overlook that. We are, as you said, we do look for the crystal ball. We do start the interview by saying, explain NFTs to me. Not, did you sit and talk to business leaders? And that's how you came to the conclusions that you have. I do want to ask for one moment if Steph Jansen is able to come off mic, because you were clapping furiously for everything around the state of California. So involved with everything.
Wait, Steph, wait 1 second. So you said something so important, Sarah, before we go to Steph, who I'm excited to talk with. It's been a while. Sarah, but just what you just said was really important. I don't want to lose it. I think I may have lost it. You were commenting on say it one more time. You were talking on how we got here.
I was saying how I literally even started the call by saying, like, let's talk about Web3 and NFTs and climate. And like, that's sexy and people think that that's the future, but you did the work of talking to the business leaders.
So I want to you're onto something, right? You're really onto something, because unlike there are a lot of people doing great work in the climate tech world. And there are a lot of VCs who are funding technologies that don't have a market yet. So we decided to fund the technologies that do have a market. Yeah. And the only way we could, that is the difference between us and some of the other investors in the space, again, also doing good work, is that we wanted to unearth where the markets are and fund those technologies today. And so that is a difference between us and some of the other investors in the space.
It's so interesting too. Forgive me, Steph, hang with me. I did an interview, the second part of an interview with a friend of mine, Ram Castillo, this morning, who works in design thinking and in human-centered design in Australia with a lot of big brands. And to what you're saying, it is this idea of not only kind of starting with empathy, right? Looking for the problem, ideating the solution, but then really the prototype and the testing. And like you're saying, like, why are people almost coming from climate out of left field? Are they just saying, like, let's invent things to help with climate? And this is me over here. And then this is business over here. Here's let me make my video bigger. So climate people are over here, business people are over here. And as you're saying, like, why isn't there this like meeting of the minds where like the climate people are saying, business people, what do you need for us to uplift what you're doing in a way that's going to help with this crisis so that we're all rowing the boat in the same direction, instead of like building our own ships and hoping that somehow they paddle to the same destination.
Right. Totally.
Yeah, that was instructive for me. I'm excited I inspired that thought.
You did.
Get on in here and talk about the state of California.
Well, I just realized I know Josh. No is relative nowadays, but Josh and I actually met here on Fireside and wound up having a really fascinating conversation with someone who wasn't really leaning into science. And Josh actually handed me the floor and said, I just can't do this. I'm in this space. I can't do it.
You were a saint. You were such a saint. I remember how you handled that. It was so impressive. And it revealed, like, I could not be doing what she's doing right now.
I will say those relationships forged in a foxhole on social audio, you're forever bonded. So you can say you know him. By the way, come to video if you want to come to video, and would love to hear from you. I'll invite you if you want to come to video.
Yeah, I'm not driving anymore, so I'm good to go.
Oh, perfect.
Hey, Josh. By the way, what's so fascinating, again, you've got an incredibly adept person here in Sarah to host this conversation. Yeah. Sarah's become a good friend.
Thank you.
But what's fascinating about the pandemic that even businesses don't understand, and I think Sarah's onto something as well, Josh, in terms of the storytelling, pandemics are a climate issue.
Right.
On the back end, on the front end, and in the middle. And I'm not sure now that I'm thinking about it, Sarah, you're really guiding this great conversation. I think we do need to connect the dots for businesses. It's not just, and which, by the way, I say just as if it's not an issue. Not only did people lose jobs, get laid off, we had food insecurity rise in the millions. But it is a climate issue. And I think
Right.
if people can understand that the economic impacts that businesses felt, that may be less inclined to lean into just the notion of the science of climate. If we can wrap that story in, I think that's a really, really important component. This is not our last pandemic. And at the rate we're going, we may see something sooner than later relative to being in a global economy, global travel, et cetera. So I think this is a really important conversation. And Sarah, you asked the great question of Josh is, where are these interviews? I think that's a great idea. But Josh, it's great to actually see you for the first time, because when we met on Fireside, we didn't have video yet.
We didn't, and I'm actually looking at my my profile pic, and that definitely needs to
I
change.
remembered
That was
picture.
an early Fireside.
Josh, that's how I remembered you.
We've all been there.
I mean, Fallon, how could you? I don't know if she's out there. Fallon, how could you do this to me? Like, I should have changed that, but I will
Fallon's
get to that.
Going to say, upload a new picture, Josh.
I know.
That's what she's going to say.
You know,
anyway, great discussion.
One thing you said, Steph, one thing you said that I want to come back to, because you're right, just to connect at least two of these dots, that we, as you know, one of the projects I worked on for the state was around food security, and and the reason that many reasons you're right is that food security is now being being attacked from both the pandemic challenge and
Russia,
from the climate challenge, and then now bring in a third situation, which is a war. So all three of these areas. So we don't have resilience right now. We don't have climate resilience. There are companies trying to help create that, but we are not resilient from. And think about, we have to change the narrative a little bit on when we talk about climate change. That doesn't mean anything to people. When we talk about extreme weather, everyone gets it. So we need to have resilience when it comes to battling extreme weather. Drought, hurricanes, tornadoes. I mean, and it's not just droughts, it's also extreme cold weather. So all that is a result of climate change. But the way that we internalize it, I think, is to think of it as extreme weather. And it's not, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. And I was going to say too, I actually agree with both of you too, and I even phrased it out this way. I think that we actually, I look at the fact that you have this climate tech, that you're investing in climate tech. I'm like, oh, he's such a do-gooder. And it's also like we need to rebrand investing in climate tech as being good for business, right? It's too siloed. It is like, oh, he's a tree hugger. He's green. That's so great. That's so wonderful. But really what we keep coming back to in this conversation, and as you were saying too, is that it makes business sense. And as you're saying too, Steph, when we look at the pandemic and businesses are saying not only how can I recover, but how can I prevent myself from falling on my face in the future, to talk about how this makes good business sense, I think is a really important point. And also kind of answers the question I'd asked earlier about small businesses, which is understanding that it's not that you wait until you're big enough to be carbon neutral or whatever the case may be. You're kind of looking for these trends and how they impact your business now.
Right. You're right. And with one of the many reasons why it's important that we change capitalism, right? We need to change things. Nonprofits have had an impact, and I think they continue to, especially around affecting influencers. But it's really without financial viability, these companies are not going to be around to scale. So we need to have, a financial success really to help drive the impact, because without that impact in year one, and those companies will not be around long enough to have scalable impact in year 10.
Steph, and that's such a good point, Josh. That's a mic drop. So that's why I'm throwing it to Steph to pick the mic back up. Because as I said, you have so much knowledge on so many things, but especially on the state of California. And we touched on that, and I pulled you up on stage, and I wanted to give you the chance to ask a question, or on anything, but especially that, because you're so knowledgeable about the work there.
Well, I just think, and I'm gonna let you two continue your conversation, but I think the real purpose of popping on is that I think talking about climate change, talking about tech, I mean, had Josh and team not created the infrastructure they did for the state of California, we must look at, and I know this is an old adage, but we really have to mean it this time, is that the private sector getting involved in government. I mean, the worst word you'll ever hear in any solution is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. It's always bad news, by the way. Sorry, government, I've been a part of you. This is truth. And so what Josh and team had to do to stand up the program that they did, this state, the United States couldn't even stand up a substantial vaccine program at scale just to vaccinate adults, let alone children. Resilience means there's room. there's room for things that happen. You've got room to add on some more pounds to a problem. Our brittleness from an infrastructure perspective, we had no room for one more pain point. Our healthcare system was broken, and that's its own climate issue too. So these are deep and wide and vast issues, but somebody like Josh with his expertise, his background, and his complete giving a crap about things in a very deep way, to the point that he could not have a conversation with this gentleman. Josh, I appreciate the work that you're doing. And Sarah, thank you for inviting me to the conversation. I'm going to let the two of you back to your discussion, but it was nice to see you again, Josh. And Sarah, is always a great discussion. I'll gently put myself back in the audience.
I'm always so excited when you're here. First of all,
she's great.
Like, you know that I'm obsessed with you. But I also, just from a messaging standpoint, Josh, some very unsolicited advice. Every time that Steph keeps saying that's a climate issue, that's powerful. Like, I would stop at a billboard that was like the pandemic, that's a climate issue. Mass vaccination, that's a climate issue. The future of business, that's a climate issue. Like, and not things that we think of when we think of climate. Like, we need to rebrand what is a climate issue. Like the supply chain, that's a climate issue. I see a billboard campaign around all of these things that we think about classically with business and politics, and then saying that's a climate issue, so that people start to register in their brain that it's not siloed. So I just want to say those are brilliant communication strategy that you just laid out for us this evening.
And lastly, what's fascinating is that Tesla as a company, which is great, and the whole idea is great, it's really not about the car, it's about the batteries. And that is its own climate issue, is the irony. Like, we do something that feels good and looks good. And in fact, there is good impact, but there's always a back end problem. And if we lead with something that feels good and looks good, but we're creating additional issues, we can't recycle every battery that we're talking about. And so even geothermal energy, which is a combination of geothermal, solar, and some other technologies, can actually get us off a grid. But guess what? It still requires batteries. So we have bigger problems here to fry, and wise people like Josh are going to solve all of these problems. So happy.
The entrepreneurs will solve them all. But Steph, don't go, because this is you're making an important point, and the difference between government and the private sector. So there's a PUC issue that's come up, and it's around the disparity that comes from non-solar owners subsidizing solar for people who have solar, right? And the government's answer initially was to try and penalize the solar owners. We know we want more solar on rooftops, and that's what's being pushed, at the state legislature, is to try and penalize the solar and have them pay a fee. Terrible answer. That's a typical government answer.
It is.
The answer is, let's fund solar for renters. Why don't we? There's a business opportunity. Let's give solar to the people who don't have it. Let's make it affordable. Let's make it easy. Instead of saying, oh, renters don't have solar, therefore they shouldn't pay for this. Let's just fine those owners who have solar. So I think the private sector thinks about the world differently, and what the government might see as a regulatory penalty is an opportunity for the private sector to make a difference.
And the problem with government is that government, because it's driven by politics, meaning our leaders are in the world of politics, they're driven through political gain, which is always a short-term feel-good issue that almost always causes long-term pain. And it always is more expensive. And so if we can get both sides, because we are still living in a both sides world, to the table to say, look, we actually have to take politics out of this, because if you make these tough decisions now in all of these spaces, the long-term gain for where we are all trying to go, because we all reap the benefit, is right around the corner. But if we continue to do what we're doing, we will fail and continue to fail. And we're never going to get to the other side. So getting politics out of that is a mere impossibility, but that indeed is going to be, it just is going to be the answer.
Well, and it's so interesting, and we're not letting you go, Steph, because you're so smart.
Okay, well, I don't want to take over your conversation.
I love it. No, stay.
But it's interesting, too. I keep coming back to this dichotomy, almost this like binary understanding, because even when you bring up politics, we generally think that Republicans are better at business and Democrats are better at the environment. So again, this idea of how do we build these bridges? And then Josh, like this idea that you keep raising, that it's going back to the private sector, that it's understanding that government's not going to build those bridges, that people who are siloed in their ideologies aren't going to build those bridges. But if we can, really reach out to business owners in a meaningful way, which is the work that you're doing, it's almost like a nothing succeeds like success kind of thing, of where maybe when people see it, they'll start to understand it, is sort of what I'm taking from this.
You mean like fake it till you make it?
No, I mean like people who are like, what do you mean caring about the environment is going to be good for my business? that maybe you can't just explain it to them. They have to literally see it and experience it and feel it and watch it in motion.
I think that, where multimedia is way more powerful than just reading about something. So I agree with you, like having an interactive experience around it, especially even around like the consequences of climate change. Like everyone finds like God in the foxhole, right? So we're going to find people will get quickly religious about climate change the more their lives are impacted. Sadly, the people that are impacted the most are the folks that have the smallest voices today, right? And so that's a problem, but that's another conversation we can have today or another time about climate justice.
How do we amplify those stories? Just to pull on the thread.
Sarah, what's interesting? So one of the problems we're having, and Sarah, you're a marketing whiz, so this is going to completely relate to you. The messaging around climate change has largely been driven by Democrats. And Democrats and I'm brushing with a very broad stroke right now, so everybody work with me. If you're a Democrat or Republican in the audience, please don't take any of this personally. I'm just having a general fact-based conversation.
Politics. Let's go, girl.
I promise you. But what's important, because this is actually a fact, is that the Democrat Party is leading the discussion on climate change. And because their audience tends to emote more, the messaging is related to, doesn't it make you feel good to save the tree? And people go, yes. And businesses go, I don't give a shit about that tree. Yes. What I give a shit about is my bottom line. We aren't messaging to the Republican Party in a way that they can understand it and embrace it. We're not talking about money and the bottom line. We're just not. And so until we understand that we have two parties we have to market to on all policy issues, and we direct that accordingly as if it were a campaign, because by the way it is, we're never going to get there. Josh, would you agree with that?
I totally agree with it. I agree with your existential kind of statement, right? We have to make this apolitical. We have to have it really embodied by all the folks that are, at least the center of our political spectrum. The challenge with it, and maybe I've kind of given up on it, is I don't see that happening fast. And so I kind of have just returned to the private sector and investing in technologies that don't need policy to be successful, right? They don't need a policy change to be successful. They are going to be successful in their own right and going to be impactful in their own right without that. So I'm kind of like, I started out on I agree with everything you said. I'm just skeptical that we're going to get there fast. And I'm hopeful that others will figure that piece out, the policy piece out.
I think, here's what I will say. I do think conversations like this are such an important starting point, because even for me, again, like Josh, I described your career at the beginning as an evolution from he was at the forefront of tech and now he cares about all things green. And you were like, no. I'm still at the forefront of tech. That's why I care about what's going on in the environment. And I think even that, anyone who we can kind of awaken that light bulb in, it'll be really powerful, that it's not a shift, it's one and the same. And I'm also excited because my dear friend Ramon Ray is here, and I'm super excited because Ramon for the past 20 years has had a newsletter for small businesses in the tech space. So I'm super excited to hear your thoughts on this conversation, Ramon, and everyone get to know Ramon. He's awesome.
Hey, Sarah, I appreciate it very much. Hey, Stephanie. Hey, Josh. Thanks for having me here, Sarah. I hesitated, Sarah, to come to the stage here because what I have to ask the team is a bit controversial. I was just, jumping at the last
get in there,
few minutes
Ramon.
of the conversation. So here's my question, and I'd love to get off stage after, if I may, to let you all discuss it. But I guess one thing going back, and I know Stephanie said, it shouldn't be politics, but from my vantage point, and I'll leave it at that, it's all politics. Maybe that's the lens I'm hearing. Is that going back to Republicans and Democrats? And I know, Sarah, if you don't want to take it that far, we can bring it back to where you want it. But it seems to be, yes, that the ultimate goal is there should be no airplanes. There should be no cars. You're evil if you eat meat. We should have no plastic bags. That there should be no hair salons because use chemicals. It's just this vibrancy that I hear, that's the real plot, the real goal, meaning it sounds good with Stephanie, Josh, and Sarah, talking nicely, but behind closed doors, when you guys are at the hotels, and you mentioned the word a few times, Josh, right? Activists, you don't see people saying, let's be good stewards of the earth. Let's say the name out at a Trump rally or a Republican rally. You don't.
Right.
You see them only Trayvon, down police, save our wombs, climate change. So I'll end there, but that's from my vantage point why I'm glad at this conversation. I feel safe with Sarah, but I do feel a bit of a anger, meanness. I hide, and I'm even nervous coming here saying this. Maybe I'm afraid, really, that I'll be canceled. I know I won't write from saying, but I'm cautious because those people, and I'll end here, that are like that with the, not Josh and Stephanie, but like the activists, as you said, Josh, those are people like, okay, you're saying you do want to take a rowboat from Europe to here. No, sorry. I don't want to
Right.
take a rowboat to visit my son
Yeah.
in Europe. I don't. And if that's what this means, and that, or I'll say it larger, one more thing, that Amazon can't build big factories and hire people. If you're saying, no, we're
Yeah.
cutting all that out and we're going to pay everybody equally. No, okay, sorry. I guess I'm weird and I'm bad. So thanks for listening.
Ramon, stay for the answers. You're safe
Yeah,
here.
you don't get
the
to
answers,
leave.
I promise.
Yeah.
No one's going to
Yeah.
take your head off. But yeah, let's go around and let's answer this. Josh, I'd love to hear from you first, and then Steph, and then I'll weigh in as well.
Ramon, it's a great point. And for years, the kind of, when you look at the fringes of any movement, right, you have a lot of what you're talking about, right? So I kind of started this, I don't know if you're at the beginning, but really there's no solution to climate change that requires that people spend more money, pay a green premium, not enjoy the things they're enjoying. We need to deliver solutions to climate change that allow consumers to enjoy life, right? Without making them sacrifice, because you know what, they want sacrifice. They will not. And it's even worse if we Westerners go to like the new economies in Africa and even South America and say, oh, by the way, you have money now, you can't spend it. We screwed the world up for you. You cannot spend your money. It's not fair, and it's not where we should be going. So I agree with what you said. We need to focus on, I think Stephanie brought up the Tesla. Tesla's a great example. Yes, it's a little more expensive, but it's cool. It's new and different and fun, and it's all the things that I want to see at every solution to climate change that affects consumers. Versus saying, you know what, you can't drive at all. You have to walk everywhere or bike everywhere. That's just not reasonable for most people. So I'm with you. Steph's about to jump in and say something similar, it sounds like.
Ramon, by the way, I was a Republican political consultant that got Republicans elected at all levels of government for 20 years. So you're safe, baby. You're safe. Since then, I joined forces with the Lincoln Project, and that's a whole another story. That being said, here's the scoop. What we know is it doesn't work if we ignore consumers. It's asinine. I order my toilet paper on Amazon. I still enjoy the conveniences of all of that. And so I'm there too. And by the way, relative to politics, have you heard of the horseshoe theory in politics? And that is that if you have a right, so here, this is not a horseshoe, but we're going to pretend it is, okay? Horseshoes actually bend at the edge. So if you have Republicans on one side and Democrats on the other side, that bend would be the far, far, far right and the far, far, far left. And we define them as the same category. It's very radical, many times violent, meaning, right, like climate change by any means necessary will roll you over. Both sides have that. But everybody else in the middle, it's understanding that we do live in a capitalist society. And so how do we address the issues of climate change and other things that Josh are working on in a way that's easily accessible to the consumer, that is consumer friendly? That means we can actually increase and encourage adoption because it's easy, right? Creating pain points in a world of smartphones is never going to work. It just doesn't. Pain points don't work anymore. We want it now. We want it fast. We want to swipe. And so it's about having a greater conversation about, we all want businesses to succeed. We all want people to have jobs or have an opportunity to be an entrepreneur if that's how they're, so we need an environment for that, while also acknowledging that climate change has become more and more devastating to lives, to food supply, to supply chain. As I was driving and listening to Josh talking about the supply chain, nobody ever talked about that before at scale. We are now. Everybody understands that. And all of these things boil down to climate. So I think when Sarah's expertise in marketing, I think this is a marketing issue. And I do think we can solve it through some different types of marketing. We've proven that we can do that in the past. We ended, it feels like almost ended cigarette smoking. And everybody was smoking. Pregnant people were smoking, like everybody was smoking. We had an impact on it, right? So there is a way to do it. But an immediate solution, Josh, 100% no. Nothing is immediate. But if we can start chipping away slowly, while acknowledging a capitalistic society, while acknowledging what drives consumer behavior and sort of addressing that as the core issue, I think we're going to be okay, but it's going to take a long time.
These are some good answers. So
thank you, Sarah. I feel like I survived the conversation. Thank you all.
No, I love it. You're not leaving yet. We're going to chat. We're going to chat for a minute. I'm going to get in the marketing end. So listen, I think, and I've said this before, I always talk about a role and a goal. And candidly, I think that lots of times when you look at marketing and something's not working, you have to say to that person, do you want to be right or do you want to win? And the failure of the Democratic Party in so many things that they want to push forward is that they'd rather be right than win. And so because of that, their messaging is elitist. They're known as elitist. And so then what happens, to your exact point, is that, think about it like fitness. Think about if you were stepping into fitness for the first time, the difference between if you came to your trainer and said, I walked a mile today, and your trainer was like, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Way to move. We're going to keep it up. We're going to see how many days we stack it together. Versus if your trainer was like, you suck. Everyone else out here can run 10 miles. You walked one. You are a piece of crap. We don't want you until you can run 10 miles and then come back. And candidly, I think to your point, Ramon, unfortunately, not only is there an elitist vibe that I see to the green climate, not only does there seem to be an anti-business vibe, but there also seems to be like this all or nothing vibe that, as you're saying, it's like, and even phrases that I don't understand, candidly, like, I'll be honest with you, Josh, it's embarrassing to admit this at the interview. I don't 100% understand what carbon neutral means, but I feel like if I had a company
and not alone.
They wouldn't want me there. You know what I mean? Like if it was like, oh, well, I've started to undertake this, there's a feeling, like you said, Ramon, that people would be like, it's not enough. We don't want you. And so to me, I think a first step is for people who understand what they're doing to say, pull up a seat at the table. If you're interested in being here, we want you. If you're interested in having the conversation, we want you. And then also, again, instead of being like, look at us, we know the most about climate change, trying to make it accessible, trying to bring people in and trying to look for compromises and solutions would be kind of my marketing 2 cents.
So like, I think that's great. Well said, Sarah. And I want to bring up an example that got, I don't think he was canceled, but now I think he's fine. But at the time it was really controversial. I've gotten to know Van Jones over the last year and we're working on some things together. And a lot of people said, hey, you won, but you created all this havoc on the way. He won, right? He got the criminal justice bill passed. He had to work with Trump to make it happen. And a lot of people were like, how dare you work with Trump? And he got grief from both sides, right? So I would say he got it done, right? He's helping a lot of people.
Do you want to win or do you want to be right?
Right. He got it done.
Won.
So he's an example of, I think I tend to agree with the way he approaches the world. And the second thing, which will also get me canceled in the climate world, is that I love fast fashion, right? So people hear fast fashion and they say like ruining the planet, terrible. But you know what fast fashion is? It makes fashion affordable to people who ordinarily couldn't afford it. So let's not throw out fast fashion and say that it's all bad. Let's try and help fast fashion become more sustainable, because the people who don't like it are the people who can probably afford buying more expensive stuff, whereas fast fashion makes it affordable to everybody. So I think there are like a lot of misconceptions in climate. Roman, you brought up a bunch of great examples, Ramon, and I really appreciate it. And I think there's a lot more discussion about how we move between the parties and how we can not have to be right, but we can win. I agree.
No, I appreciate that. No, and thank you for listening, and thank you for having me here. And I think that Stephanie and Josh, of course, you, Sarah, too, but, in different bucket. But as far as the climate change discussion, I think that in that case, then you all have a lot long to go, and thank you for allowing me to share this. But I am a bit, not literally, but metaphorically nervous even talking here,
Yeah.
as you know better than me.
Ramon, I'm a bodyguard. You ain't
No, I know what I mean is metaphorically, meaning those listening, because I have had some issues, and Sarah knows I'm a nice person. In other words, I guess I'll just put it in a bow here. I'm a nice person, love people and all this, but to the world, if I say different views on things, oh, he's an evil business owner. Even my own family once said, oh, these people don't give money. But the point is, I'm saying, Josh and Stephanie, thank you. It's just, I guess that I would encourage, indeed, as I know you're trying to do, share it with your peers, your colleagues, those who are a bit more rabid, because I think they're ruining it for you. And Stephanie, that's why I disagreed in a fun way. It is all politics from my lens, what I see. That's it. You hear climate change, read the newspaper. It's New York Times versus WSJ. It's the person who says, don't build factories versus those who do.
Right.
That's it. That's all I hear, meaning in my
You're
newsfeed.
totally right.
And I'm a layperson.
Yeah.
Just at the top level?
Well, we
Right.
love you, Ramon. And I think the more people who are willing to come up on stage and ask these questions and have these conversations on Fireside, this is actually how we break down those concerns and those barriers. And
And if I may say, Ramon, it is time. And I'm sorry that, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to sound elitist. And I also, turns out I don't care. It's time for the smart kids in the back of the classroom to come to the front of the classroom and have these conversations. Because if not us, who? It will either remain politicized and remain rabid, and that horseshoe bending into each other. They're the loudest. They're not the majority, but they're the loudest. And if we don't start having these conversations in interesting ways that are easily accessible to everybody, we are going to continue. Now but Ramon, to your point, I think it's also really important, in my humble opinion, that when you approach any conversation with reason and a solid disposition and being intelligent, the rabid people may still be rabid, but the other people aren't going to be rabid. And it's really, really important that our voices and our conversations happen. It's modeling behavior. It's modeling how to disagree or challenge each other and push back in a respectful, mature way. So Ramon, I want to say, I'm thrilled you hopped up. It's super great to meet you. And please keep opening your mouth and letting those smart words come flying out. They must be at the table. So great to meet you.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for the opportunity. I'm going to keep listening. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it. Great discussion. Thank you, Josh.
So I do want to ask, we have a few minutes left here. I do want to save the last couple minutes, Josh, so you can share with everyone where they can find you and all that good stuff. We have time for one more question. If there's someone in the audience who wants to jump up on stage, who has a burning question, this is your moment. Don't be shy. Grab the mic. You can pick audio or video if you want to stay on audio. I'm going to do a little like going once, going twice. And if not, then Steph and I will just ask, yes, Steph.
And you can put something in the chat. For those of you in the audience that don't know, if you hit that react button at the bottom right hand of your screen and you pop it up, if you choose an emoji, that's going to bring up the card that allows you to type a question if you don't even want to come on audio. And so if you'd like to, as Sarah's wrapping up the show, I just want to let you know that's another way that you can earn.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that. So Josh, I want to ask you, because you're so generous to spend this time with us this evening, is there something that you had hoped to cover, like a burning something that you were hoping I'd ask you about that I haven't yet, that we can talk about for the last few minutes of this chat this evening?
Well, I'm gonna say two things. The first is to Ramon, and I'm gonna be a little critical of Ramon, just because everyone's being so loving of Ramon. Ramon, you need to get a little bit of feedback too, and I think ordinarily you would do this. So I want to be careful about. It's important, especially with climate change, that we share what we stand for, not what we just stand against, right? So I think it's important to be critical of the folks that are making it harder. But then it's like, well, what do you believe in? And so I want to make sure that in the conversations I'm having, it's really easy to go negative on climate. But I also try for myself to be like, okay, where are the opportunities? Where do I stand? So that was my only criticism of the beautiful sharing that Ramon did. The other thing is that when it comes to the Republicans, like behind closed doors, actually will tell you they believe in climate change. They're not deniers, right? And to Stephanie, your point, they can't say that publicly because their party is going to be challenged by it. But behind closed doors, they do agree. Mitt Romney has been great about publicly stating, his belief in climate change, and he's been great about a lot of things. And the second thing is that the biggest businesses typically are Republican, right, focused. Like Larry Fink, who manages $10 trillion, right? He's the CEO of BlackRock. He publicly stated that the next $1,000 billion companies are going to be climate tech companies. So business is behind this. It's this, and both of you know this better than I do. It's like, business is behind it. Like behind closed doors, Republicans, most are behind it. How do we bridge the gap between behind closed doors, what businesses want, and what the Republican Party is saying publicly? I ask you both.
We have to give Republicans sexy messaging that makes sense for their base. And by the way, the funny thing about it is it won't be hard. It's actually not hard to draw this directly to the economy and jobs and growth. It's not hard. So I just think they need the toolkit. Here's how you go talk to your constituents, whether you're a member of Congress or state legislatures or even county supervisors and city councils and townships. They just need the messaging. So Josh, to your point, behind closed doors, by the way, both parties are running elitist right now. This is a both party problem. Yeah. I promise you on that. I promise you all day long that's true. And so if I promise you, and also don't overestimate, I'm sorry to say it, the intelligence either of even our elected officials. They work off of toolkits. Here's your talking points for this particular policy issue. Go out to your constituency and discuss it this way. They need a toolbox. I promise. That's what they need.
So here's why I love every time I get to have a conversation with Steph is because we think so similarly. And my instant thought was messaging. But here's actually what I would add to that. I love that you're thinking top down because my argument would have been bottom up. My argument would be that obviously any elected official cares about what their populace is saying, what their constituents are saying, because they want to get reelected to the point that it will help them get reelected. So I actually think, to your point, Josh, when you were talking about earlier about influencers, and when we think about other ways that we populate a message that doesn't feel like it's from government, which is what we were talking about earlier, again, I would look at several things. So I said, first of all, we can rewind back 30 minutes. That tagline that Steph gave you, that's a climate issue after all kinds of things that we don't consider climate issues. Very powerful. Second of all, I think moving away from the brand ambassadors and the whole, it's so interesting because one of the things that we say in marketing is how does it make you feel? We need to move away from the touchy-feely, lovey-lovey tree hugger feeling, which is what Steph said, to it makes me feel like an early adopter. It makes me feel like a tech founder. So I even picture this thing of again, not, Gal Gadot leading people singing Imagine, but respected business leaders being I founded an XX multi-million billion-dollar company. And I believe that ClimateTech is what's going to make me profitable. So changing the face of who the brand ambassadors are for the people on the business front. And then again, at the constituent level, explaining it in such a clear way. So being hey, when you go out to eat right now and it's so freaking expensive and you keep hearing about the supply chain, let's break down how expensive it is to get each ingredient for the meal here, how much more expensive the plastic container takeout is more than it was before, how expensive it is for the delivery driver, how expensive it is for all of these things that actually tie back to the environment. And if we solve for all of those things, that actually you can go out to eat twice as often and all of these other, you know what I mean? It's literally finding those points, because then I think if you have the political official and they're business leaders are telling me that it's going to help their business. My constituents are telling me that it's going to make it actually affordable again for them to take their family out to eat. And you're telling me, Steph gave me the toolkit on how it's going to help me run for reelection. I mean, to me, that's kind of how you thread it together. And
I would say have FOMO. This is the biggest opportunity of your lifetime. Yeah. I don't care who you are.
All right, we're interviewing you. Thank you. No, continue. That's such a good point. You said that earlier. ClimateTech is not, it's not elitist. It's not green. It's not leftist. It's not lovey-lovey, huggy tree hugger. It's a business opportunity.
It's the biggest business opportunity of our lifetime. Period.
I also think that when you pull that catalog together of the interviews that you did with the business leaders, all saying that, and we think about how we're going to put that content out, when we think about the spread and Vanity Fair and the commercial that's going to run and the little video that's going to run at the next NFT week and everything else, that's going to make a big difference.
It's a great idea.
Just make it sexy. Have Burger King sold more burgers because they had a hot woman with big boobs biting on a burger in a really sexual way. They sold burgers. We just have to talk to people the way they need to get talked to. It's amazing how much you can move it.
Oh my God.
Right?
I can't unhear that. I'm trying to think how I can make that image go away.
Josh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Steph, thank you for hopping in and co-hosting, which is always such an honor and a pleasure as well. Everyone who's watching, you can find Steph on Fireside. She lives here. Josh, where can people find you and follow up on the work that you're doing?
I mean, mainly I'm a creature of Twitter, so you can find me Josh Media on Twitter. I'm also Josh Media on LinkedIn. But Twitter is where I spend most of my time sharing and learning and engaging.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I enjoyed this conversation so much. I'll make the replay live. We'll share it out. And For anyone who's listening, if you've enjoyed this conversation, just share this out. Share this with other business leaders. Share this, link it in your newsletter this week that you listened to this conversation. Share it with anyone who you know who owns a business, who is politically minded, who's business minded, because as Steph said earlier, I think the more we have these conversations, the more that we're going to make an impact. So thank you all so much for being here this evening.
Good to see you.